I'm here today with the 2020 Honda Civic Si Sedan. The MSRP on this Si is $25,200. There are no options except for summer tires, which add another $200 to that price. The Si is powered by Honda's 1.5-liter Earth Dreams turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. It makes 205 horsepower and 192 pound-feet of torque. The curb weight on this Si is pretty light at 2,900 pounds, and it averages pretty impressive fuel economy at 26 miles to the gallon in the city and 36 on the highway. You could probably even beat that 36 mpg highway figure. I think Car and Driver even got 42 mpg on their 75 mile an hour highway test, which is pretty impressive. That was on the all-season tires like we have here. Let's take a walk around this Civic Si, show you some of its features, and then we'll go for a drive. As many of you guys know, I'm a huge fan of the Honda Civic Type R, and I haven't really spent a lot of time in the Civic Si. I've driven one a couple years ago when they first came out, but this new turbocharged variant I've really only driven on track at Road America, and that's about it. So pretty limited time in this. I've been excited to drive this Si. I love the gearbox. There are some things that I really like about this car, and there are some things that do annoy me and bug me about it. In this video, we're going to go over all of that. Let's start off, we'll show you around the exterior, see what some of the updates for this 2020 Si look like. I am really glad that Honda is still making the sedan version of this car. I think this is the one I would get if I were in the market for a 2020 Si. It's just a little bit more usable, a little bit more practical. I don't think you give up much in terms of outright performance. The coupe is slightly lighter. Pretty decent sized trunk. You do not get a spare tire in this car, but you do get a fix-a-flat repair kit. You have a couple levers here to pull down the back seats and get some room there. And of course, every Civic Si comes with its HDMI port right at the bottom of the exhaust there. Decent hole there to put larger cargo through the rear seats. It's very basic, very bare bones back here, not even a USB port or anything. Very basic cloth. You do get a couple of cup holders and an attractive view of these sporty bucket seats. Honda has some pretty cool storage solutions in the center console here. There's a lot of ways you can configure this. Everything kind of moves around. You can shift it. There are different levels. It's pretty nice. There's even a USB charger at the bottom. This armrest slides back and forth as well. I do like the packaging of this car compared to the older Civics where they had two screens. This is a little bit more of a simpler layout. Getting into the front seat, I have a nice driving position. I can get nice and low in the seat. All these mechanical controls give me a lot of adjustability. The steering wheel telescopes with a pretty good amount of range. You shouldn't have any trouble finding a nice, comfortable driving position. We get a pretty low-res reverse camera. It has a few different modes with super wide angle above and a normal view. Of course, if you have your seatbelt on, put it in first gear and let the clutch out, the handbrake will automatically disengage, which is kind of nice. The clutch, the controls, everything is very light. The steering has a little bit of weight to it, but otherwise this is pretty standard Honda. The real special piece to this Si, of course, though, is this transmission. This 6-speed manual is one of the greats. you're there, Honda's added a little bit of active sound control to this SI. There's a microphone in the engine bay that kind of picks up on engine sound and puts it out through the speakers. In most normal driving, it's not too intrusive and it doesn't make a lot of noise, but once you really start to push this car and let the revs get into the higher RPMs, it becomes a lot more present, and I'm not sure I like it, honestly. Couple that with the rev hang from this 1.5 liter turbo, and it's just not a good sound. There is a way to unplug the active sound control. That's getting into unplugging things and taking out the glove box, stuff like that. But in most driving, it doesn't bother me. It's just when you're really hustling it, it gets to be a little bit annoying. Outside of sport mode, it's not as loud, and that is a good thing. I do appreciate that. I don't find myself going into sport mode a whole lot in this car. It does stiffen up the dampers quite a bit, and it makes the ride a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not really sure it's necessary for most of your driving in your SI. Still though, let's do a 0 to 60. See how this does. It's pretty quick. I love the shifter. The front differential really helps this car hook up. I love that Honda has offered a mechanical limited slip diff in these Civic SIs for years. It's definitely one of the high points of this car from a mechanical standpoint. This car has great traction out of corners. And this new Civic platform handles really, really well. From just your base Civic to your SI to your Type R, it's amazing what these things can do around the corners. You can see there how stiff sport suspension makes this car. For me, that's the reason alone not to set it into sport mode, is just the suspension gets way too stiff. Dynamically, the best way I can describe this car is it's a joy to drive around normally. Once you start to push it, the rev hang becomes an issue. The sound, active sound, is a little bit of a nuisance to me personally, and it handles well. The shifter is awesome, but the rest of the experience falls a little bit short, I think. And depends, This is a very enjoyable car. This is a very enjoyable car to drive around on a daily basis, just because the shifter is nice. There's a good amount of torque from this motor, but only in boost. This is a 1.5 liter engine, and if you're not getting into the boost, you're really not going to have any power, any torque to speak of. But luckily the turbo does spool up relatively quickly. There's a little bit of turbo lag, but in most gears, it's pretty responsive. I will say that this new SI does have slightly shorter gearing, and that is nice. I think that adds to a little bit more of a dynamic driving experience. Very often manufacturers are over-gearing cars and in the hopes to achieve better fuel economy, and Honda kind of shortened the final drive on this. I think that's a nice change. Let's test out the lane keep assist and cruise control system here. I've always been pretty impressed with Honda sensing, though there are a couple drawbacks. It keeps me really well centered in the lane, but as soon as that lane diverges or there's a break in the lines, the system doesn't quite know what to do. So let's see what happens here when things move around. The car doesn't really know where it is. It's moving all over the place. It's a system that you really have to keep an eye on and remain an active part of the driving experience. I like the little beep when you hit red line. The ergonomics, the buttons in here are really easy to use. There's buttons and knobs for everything. You can turn everything on, you can turn everything off. I love the layout of this cabin. It's very nice. It's looking a little bit dated now, but honestly, as a functional cabin, it works really, really well. You can increase or decrease your speed by 5-mile-an-hour increments by holding the cruise control button. Personally, I kind of tend to keep lane keep assist off and just use the cruise control. The radar guided system works really well. And I have disabled the automatic collision braking in this car. I've had a few instances where it's been a little bit buggy. Most of the time it works well, but every now and then it'll slam on the brakes when a car isn't quite in front of me, and that just keeps me a little bit unnerved. I'm not too comfortable with that. For the price, it's hard to do a little better dynamically. I think the chassis on this car, the way it drives, the way it handles is great. There are some issues with, the stuff that I've just talked about, but overall it's a pretty nice car. It's an easy car to live with. There are ways around some of the complaints that I have. It gets phenomenal fuel economy. The gas mileage in this SI is really quite impressive. We've been kind of flogging this thing the last day or so, and it's still averaging 30 miles to the gallon, which is amazing. I think if you were hypermiling this, you could get some pretty impressive fuel economy numbers. Let's see how lane keep does here on the highway. The radar guided cruise is smooth to slow down and speed up. The lane keeps you nice and centered. Let's see how it does here once this truck moves over. Yeah, it's pretty quick to accelerate again. It does prompt you about every few seconds to keep your hands on the wheel and keep your steering. As long as you just rest a hand down on the wheel, you're fine. It won't usually bug you too much. There is a little bit of wind and road noise at speed. I don't know if you'd be able to quietly have a conversation in this SI. You might need to speak a little bit louder. There's just a weird rubber bandy effect between shifts, and that rev hang, you're just kind of letting the clutch drop those revs. The reason for rev hang is it's an emissions thing. If you keep the revs from dropping too quickly, it avoids dumping more fuel into the engine, and it saves gas. But does result in a slightly less desirable driving experience. And honestly, it's been a thing on Civic SIs for quite a while. It's not a deal breaker for me though, and in normal day-to-day driving, it's not as present. It's really only a problem when you're pushing it hard. Let's do a little sound test. We'll dip into Apple CarPlay. I think the sound system in this is quite good. I'd be perfectly happy to daily drive this. It's clear, it has good bass. Yeah, not bad at all. Alright guys, well, some first impressions on the Civic Si. A little bit of a mixed bag, but overall a pretty good car. I think a lot of these issues I could live with. It represents pretty good value. It's a nice overall package. I think it looks good. I don't really like the way it sounds with this new sound control. I hope the Type R is slightly different. I know it's kind of drive mode independent, and in sport mode this does get a lot louder, but sport mode isn't really a very desirable mode with how much it stiffens up the suspension, in my opinion. It is great that Honda is offering this Honda Sensing package with a manual transmission. Not all manufacturers do that, and it's so great that they're still making the Si a manual-only option. And honestly, this is one of the best transmissions on the market. It's a really great shifter. It just feels awesome. It feels proper. So this is probably the highlight of the car for me. Alright guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.